Sponsor, Senator Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Senators. I'm Senator Long, representing District 20 in 6 wards in the city of Manchester. A fair and accurate school funding formula would ensure the taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely and efficiently. But right now, our formula undercounts children living in poverty, shortchanging our schools and forcing them to do more with less. By using a more precise measure, Medicaid eligibility, we can ensure funds go where they are needed most while reducing bureaucracy for schools and families. Right now, our state school funding formula measures poverty as the number of students receiving free and reduced price meals. But this measure is outdated, inaccurate, and inefficient. Defining poverty need, according to the number of children currently approved for free and reduced lunch, consistently undercounts the number of children living in poverty in our school districts. There are an estimated 10,500 eligible children who are being left out by the formula because they aren't enrolled in free and reduced meals. This is for a variety of reasons, including complicated forms and unnecessary paperwork, lack of awareness, as well as concerns about family privacy. Children who are living in households experiencing poverty often have higher education needs and therefore cost schools more to meet all their needs. That's why the funding formula has additional differentiated aid based on poverty. So when we use a measure that doesn't count all the actual children who are living in poverty, it means schools are having to try to meet the additional needs with fewer dollars. In short, schools aren't receiving enough state funding to help educate their students, and I believe we can fix that. And with that, I know Ms. Milligan from the Hampshire Hunger Solutions is here to testify also.
Thank you, Senator Long. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Laura Milliken.
Good morning, Senator Murphy, Chairman Murphy, and honorable members of the Senate Education Committee. New Hampshire Hunger Solutions appreciates the opportunity to testify in support of SB 293. We're a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that advocates to end food insecurity, improve equitable access to nutritious food, and address hunger's root causes for all New Hampshire residents. We work with schools to connect more eligible children with free and reduced meals and to help increase student participation in school breakfast. We help to coordinate 8 food access coalitions across the state who are working together to solve hunger in their communities. So, why am I talking to you about access to food when the bill before you is about the state school funding formula? The answer is that the current school funding formula is a barrier to school districts with the highest levels of poverty participating in the USDA Community Eligibility Provision. The Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, is a federal program that allows high poverty schools to offer free meals to all the children in the school, regardless of family income. And it reimburses the schools at a higher rate. The federal government reimburses the schools at a higher rate based on the number of children on SNAP, TANF, and other programs that qualify children for school meals. Feeding every child at school ensures a child has an equal opportunity to succeed and beyond. Families in schools participating in CEP don't fill out free and reduced meal forms, just like during the pandemic when we had waivers at the federal level that enabled all children to eat in schools. And every child can eat meals at school under CEP. It reduces hunger and administrative costs. Communities with low property values and higher poverty rates already struggle to raise the necessary funds to meet their children's needs. CEP can help these communities provide an essential service that improves student wellness and learning outcomes. Right now, there are 103 schools in New Hampshire that are eligible for the community eligibility provision, but just 2 schools in New Hampshire are feeding kids using CEP. And that's because of the state school funding formula. If they don't collect the forms, they feel like they won't be able to get the additional adequacy dollars. So using a Medicaid-based measure ensures that taxpayer dollars are targeted efficiently. It feeds more children. It prevents schools from losing funds when they use important programs such as community eligibility. So I urge you to vote to pass on SB 293. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of this?
And I
Seeing none, thank you. There is no one else signed up to speak. One person signed in support, one person signed in opposition. Online, we had 64 in opposition and 169 in support. I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 293. We're a bit ahead of schedule. We have about 13 minutes for the next hearing. We're in recess until 3:20. Time being 3:20, I'm going to bring to order the hearing on Senate Bill 295. Before we get started, I just want to ask everyone, please refrain from reading testimony. We will not be executing the bill today. If you have written testimony, you can hand it in. We will certainly have the time to research it and read it. Please do not repeat prior testimony. And we're happy to hear everyone, but we want to make sure we have time to listen to everyone. Please keep your comments at 3 minutes or less. With that, I'm going to introduce the prime sponsor, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Victoria Sullivan. I represent Senate District 18, which includes Manchester Wards 5 through 9 and the town of Litchfield. I'm here today to introduce Senate Bill 295 FN, which simply removes the income cap on education freedom accounts. First, I find that the term education freedom accounts and the term vouchers are used interchangeably during these discussions, and I want to clarify that vouchers are given directly to parents or guardians to use. Education freedom accounts, also referred to as education savings accounts in other states, are funds that are placed in an account that is monitored and controlled by an organization. I have provided you with a handout that also outlines these differences. Using the proper terminology is important in order to have an educated conversation on this matter. New Hampshire taxpayers and voters have made it clear that they support the efforts to expand education freedom accounts. The current EFA law has been very successful. I have families that come to me all the time sharing their experiences about how well their children are doing, having left a school or a school environment that was not suited for them and into schools where they are thriving. Families that are currently using EFAs and those that will use them in the future deserve stability and confidence that they will be able to continue the program until graduation. Right now in the Senate, there is a bill that would require families to undergo income qualification each year. I've seen families who qualified for Children's Scholarship Fund who lost their funding because their family made just $50 more than the average the year before. Families who are using these funds should not be subjected to education insecurity, worried that their children's education is only secure from each legislative cycle to the next legislative cycle. There will undoubtedly be opponents that state that wealthy families will be able to use these funds. The fact is, children of wealthy families are currently attend traditional public schools at a taxpayer cost of approximately $21,000 per student. No one seems to have a problem with that. However, this bill has the potential to actually reduce the taxpayer dollars used by wealthy families, since only the state portion of the funds, approximately $5,000, would follow the child. I provided a handout that lays out how the EFAs can be used. I would just like to remind the committee that these funds can be used by a family who would like to transfer a child from one public school to an out-of-district public school. They can also be used to support a multitude of educational opportunities, including tutoring. This is not just about using funds for private schools. However, this bill does right or wrong that is a blight on our education history. At their inception, schools were funded by taxpayers in order to provide a moral education. Part of that education was reading the Bible. In fact, Bibles were still in many American schools until the 1960s. So from the beginning, taxpayer-funded public schools were actually Protestant in nature. When Catholics began to migrate to America and their children attended public schools, they faced bigotry and discrimination fueled by anti-Catholic rhetoric. This forced Catholics to form their own schools. The Blaine Amendment was proposed to ensure that Catholic schools did not receive taxpayer funds. Although it failed on the federal level, many states adopted similar amendments. It is time to end the discrimination, bigotry, and segregation of our school system and create a new pathway that truly allows education freedom for all of New Hampshire's children. Polling has shown that this is what New Hampshire voters want. There's no bigger statement on that than the election of Governor Ayotte. She ran on expanding education freedom and having universal accounts, while her opponent ran on ending them. The voters made their voices heard, and I'm asking you to support this important piece of legislation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. You mentioned in your remarks that some families would, if there were an annual income determination, lose access to the EFA if they made $50 too much. I want to ask you about a similar program, the state's biggest program, which is the Medicaid program. It has an income threshold for children of 323% of poverty and requires annual determination. So my question is, would you support lifting the income restrictions on that state program and lifting the requirement for annual determinations so that we could make a policy statement that children's health is as important as private school or homeschool tuition?
Thank you for your question. That's not pertaining to this bill, but I will answer and say that I do work with an underserved population on a daily basis. And I will say that the cliffs that we currently have are detrimental to families and to their health and well-being. And I would happy to work with the legislature to form better ways to guide people off of public welfare and Medicaid.
Further questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, let me pull this. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Sullivan, for taking my question. In your testimony, you made two statements that that education vouchers are what the New Hampshire voters want, and that it is very successful. And so I would like to dig a little deeper into that and find out if the program, if we're claiming that this is a successful program, what data is there to show that students who are in the voucher program have improved test scores, graduation rates, pursuit of higher education, enrollment in trade apprenticeships? Where's the data that shows that this is a successful program by any measurable metric?
I thank you for your question. One correction, though, I did not say that the voucher program was a success. We don't have, that's not what we're discussing right now. We're discussing the education freedom accounts, and I did give you a handout that explains the differences in what that is.
I'll be sure to read it.
The state does have a voucher program that allows parents to take funds to go to another school, but that is not what we're discussing today. So I emailed you last night based on the conversation that we had in our education committee yesterday, the qualifications that children had to have, the families had to have, and how they had to submit information at the end of every school year that showed their progress. They had to submit either a standardized test or, other documents that support the fact that they're actually doing the work they need to do and they're excelling and they're moving on. In these cases, a lot of the time, the parents are the ones that decide whether it's successful or not. But I can tell you that the polling that we have for the state shows that people are largely in favor of this. Over 60% are in favor of expanding the education freedom accounts. It's even higher when you poll parents. That's just voters in general at 60%. It's higher when you poll parents.
May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up.
Thank you. Okay. So we understand there's no measurable data. I understand and I hear you. I'm very aware. I'm on the oversight committee for the education freedom account, and there is no data. So the parents do, if parents do testing, or if they do portfolios, and as a qualifier, I will say that as a former homeschool parent, I am extremely well-versed in the way the program works. So if this is not from an outsider's point of view, I've been on the inside, I know how this works. So if we know that there is no set data that we can, as a state, look at that shows an improvement or in any sort of test scores or pursuit of higher education or enrollment in trade programs or measurable improvement in skill sets to support any student achievement, And we are being asked through your proposal to spend even more money on a program that has no measurable data to prove its success. How do we justify in a tight budget year a program that, and if we're looking at, how people are voting with their feet, 95% of the students in New Hampshire go to a neighborhood public school. They're not in any of these other programs. So I would say that like the most successful would be the neighborhood public schools. How do we justify spending thousands and thousands and millions of dollars more on a program that has no measurable success attached to it?
So again, I will disagree with you that there isn't a measurable success attached to a measurable component to this, because they have to take standardized tests or they have to hand in portfolios to show that they have completed their grade. I will say this though. Public schools have to take assessments and proficiency tests. And in many cases, we are failing the children across this state. In my city of Manchester, especially so. And so what happens there? We keep giving those schools more money and more money and more money. So are you suggesting that if the proficiency is down to a certain point, we don't fund that anymore? Are we funding only based on proficiency and assessments outcomes?
I don't believe we're engaging in colloquy, are we, Mr. Chair?
No, I
Thank you.
would say this is not time for debate.
That was an answer to your question.
Senator
Thank you.
Anderson. Further questions?
Yeah.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So there are wildly different estimates of what lifting the income cap would mean. But one estimate is $100 million a year. Right now at the 350%, we're projected next fiscal year to spend 35 or 36 million. Given that 3/4 of the way through the current biennium, education trust fund revenues are coming in at $87 million below plan. Do you have specific ideas on what we can do to make the education trust fund sustainable so that we don't have to start rolling precious general funds into it?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. First, I have given you the latest inside the packet that I gave you. There should be the financials that we had done that show a much lower rate. And I think there's someone behind me that can answer the financial question better than I. But that original statement that you said 125 million, we discovered that that was because they were including out-of-state students that attend school here, like at Phillips Exeter Academy, or they were staying here for school, but they actually wouldn't qualify for these programs because they are out-of-state students. So that number is, I think it came in about $25 million actually. But to answer your question, this has been a priority for the governor. She said that when she was running, it's a priority for her now, and I'm confident that she will help us fund this program.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you. So the department has consistently made the claim that if a student leaves a public school for this program, that on average, the school district will save something like $16,000. However, they have never demonstrated, and we've asked over and over, what are the marginal savings of a student leaving a school in any but the smallest town, because you've still got all the fixed costs of buildings and buses and teachers and heat and water. Do you believe that there are marginal savings that the Department of Education has never been able to identify?
I can't answer for the department. I don't know if there's someone here that can answer that question for you. I'm happy to look into that for you and get that answer. I know that the more kids that take advantage of this, the more local property tax savings that there will be. But there is a breaking point. I will agree with you. There's a breaking point that we have to get to a certain point where it shows it demonstrates a good financial return for the taxpayers.
I'm sorry, could I follow up?
Sure.
Where do you see the local property tax savings if, let's say, I mean, you and I both represent the two biggest cities, so my district has 9 elementary schools. If a child leaves a 4th grade class at Birch Hill and a student leaves a 2nd grade class at Mount Pleasant, and then somebody leaves a 5th grade class at Bicentennial, where are the savings to the school district?
So, and I would say that could be the same if a child moves out of district for any reason, right? Or they homeschooled for any reason. But I will tell you that bigger than the cost savings for me, I've had families come to me that utilize this program because their child was on the verge of taking their own lives because of the situation they were stuck in their schools. There's no monetary value to that. I've had parents that reached out to me because their children had the ability to excel and were not in an environment where they could, where they left that school district and they went on to another school, or they were homeschooled and they surpassed their expectations. So I don't think we can put a dollar amount on every single child and every single outcome, but I know from my experience and the stories that have been shared with me that this is something that children need to thrive. This is a thing that parents want. Our voters have asked for it. And for my district alone, I have almost 600 students that are using the EFA programs that rely on it. And that's who I'm here to represent today.
Thank you.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Senator. I have a few questions, and I hope the chair will indulge me. We've received a document here from Mr. Bedrick, who represents the Heritage Foundation Center for Education Policy, and he's been here in New Hampshire to speak concerning EFA policies. And there's just a couple of things I want to just read to you and just ask you if you agree. Would you agree that our schools are better funded than ever? According to the New Hampshire Department of Education's latest figures, the state's public schools spent, on average, $26,320 per pupil last year.
I would agree. I've read those numbers myself.
May I continue, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. In looking at that, Mr. Bedrick goes on to claim that the EFA award was only $5,204 on average, and in some instances, it was only $2,825 compared to the $26,320 that is currently in place. Would you agree?
I know that to be factual.
Okay. May I continue, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And after analyzing changes in enrollment patterns among district schools, charter schools, and the ESA program, the state's, meaning New Hampshire's, nonpartisan joint legislative budget committee stated that changes in enrollment patterns will generate savings of $352,200 in FY 2024 relative to the enacted budget. Would you agree?
I agree, and that was the breaking point that I was talking about. 1 or 2 children may not make a difference, but the more that we expand this, the more savings that they're going to see on the local level.
May I ask one final question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, are you aware of sustainability grants?
I am not.
May I-
Oh, no, I am. I'm sorry. For the EFAs, when they left and they sustained the children that had left the district.
May I just, thank you. Just so people who are in the public who don't know what a sustainability grant, this is where the state gives a school district that have had children leave, or they've gotten an EFA scholarship, or they're in a charter school, we actually give them money for a student that's not there in order to keep them whole. So we're actually paying for students that aren't going to public schools.
Yes.
Would you agree that that's what we do?
I do. I did read that in the education numbers that came out recently about how we're funding our students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to follow up on some of the agreement that you just had with my colleague about the per pupil spending. And when the groups that you are brought forward in your attached to your testimony are talking about per pupil spending, are you aware that in the per pupil spending, each municipality has to encompass the unfunded liability of the retirement system? So the group one teachers in the retirement system that the state used to pay towards that retirement cost, we don't pay anymore. And so that is on the backs of the municipalities. So that gets you're aware that that gets factored into the per pupil spending that's being quoted here. Is that correct?
I believe that that is an issue for you to take, where we're having talks right now on the local level with their budgets, and I believe that's a conversation for your local school district and your local budgets.
May I have the latitude to follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I'm going to interject here. The purpose of the hearing is to gain information.
Right.
And at this point, I think we're venturing into a debate that's best saved for executive session. So I'd like to move on, if we can, to a lengthy list of people here to speak. Any questions? I see none. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Ms. Cornelius Schneider.
Good afternoon. Now, I did not hear correctly. I may not have heard correctly, but did you say we could not read our testimony?
Ma'am, I asked if you have written testimony. If you pass it in, we will all get copies of it.
Mhm.
We will read it. If you have something you'd like to say and summarize that testimony, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, because I've had to change my testimony, so I'd like to read, but I'll
You can
summarize.
stay within the 3-minute guideline.
Oh, yeah,
Appreciate
thank
that.
you. Okay. My name is Cornelia Schneider, and I live in Moulton Borough. I'm here to speak out against SB 295 for myself, for my family, and for my friend Hannah. Hannah works in a salon as a clerk and a manicurist. She and her husband, a carpenter, were both born and raised in New Hampshire. They have a young daughter in the Moulton Borough school system. Hannah can't be here to testify because she works at least 5 days a week, and she can't afford to take off. Neither can her husband. Hannah and her husband would never be able to afford to send their daughter to a private school or a parochial school, even with this education freedom account program. May I use the word voucher as a shorthand, or do you see them as being different? I'm not sure, but I'll use education freedom account program rather than voucher, although I see it as being a semantic issue. But they would never be able to afford a private school, even with this account. They can't make up the difference between what the EFA provides and what private school would require. And they also can't transport their daughter to a public school. And they can't, they don't have the wherewithal to teach their child at home. They don't have the experience or any of that background. So Hannah's daughter would continue going to the public school, which is fine, but the way the EFA is designed, it's going to be sucking the life out of public schools. And it's what I consider a death by 1,000 cuts. And I want to just show a political cartoon, because cartoonists have the perfect ability to visually represent a problem. And in this cartoon, and it's from an Arizona cartoonist, and what he's showing is that a public school on one side is being ripped apart in order to build a private academy. And on his boards, he has the words vouchers, but it could be EFAs as well, because the money basically is being sucked away from the public school sector into the private parochial or homeschooling sector. So I have included that cartoon for your interest. And I would just like to say something about Daniel Webster, who stands just outside this building. I consider him to be New Hampshire's greatest statesman. And here's what he said about education, public education, quote, "In our American Republic, where government is in the hands of the people, knowledge should be universally diffused by means of public schools." Daniel Webster believed public education was essential to the success of the United States, and I think he would be embarrassed, angry, and ashamed to see legislation like this, which ultimately undermines our public school system. Thank you for listening.
Any questions of this witness? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Sarah Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Sarah Scott, and I'm the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in New Hampshire. I really wanted to start off by talking about the budgetary aspect of this. There are a lot of families here today that can talk about the benefits to their family, but ultimately we believe that every child is unique, and with that comes different learning needs. Families know their children's needs better than anyone else, and empowering them with the tools to choose the right educational path can make a world of difference in their lives. So opponents of this program have argued that the cost for expansion could be over $100 million in the first year. And this number is downright false. The Josiah Bartlett Center put out data just yesterday showing that the real cost for expanding EFAs is under $17 million over the course of 2 years. $17 million is a lot different than $200 million. There are a number of reasons the $100 million a year price tag doesn't make sense, and I just want to go over a few of those. So first, it assumes that every child in New Hampshire at a private school is a New Hampshire state resident, which I think we all know is not the case. We have a number of boarding schools that attract students from out of state. We also have a number of private schools along the border, so we have students from Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine. These students are not eligible for the EFA program, and when you remove the out-of-state students, the eligible population drops significantly. Secondly, this number assumes that preschool students are also eligible for an EFA, which is not the case. Lastly, we come to the take-up rates. No state in the country has a take-up rate of 100%. In fact, the 12 states that currently have universal education choice programs like this one don't come anywhere close to 100%. So the bottom line is really that expanding New Hampshire's EFA program is fiscally responsible and will unleash opportunity for many Granite State families. By extending EFAs, we're giving the opportunity for every family to find the fit that works best for their family. Our public schools, including public charter schools, don't ask families for their income in order to utilize them, and the EFA program, being just as much a part of public education, shouldn't either. As someone who's lived here all my life, I want New Hampshire to remain a place where families don't just stay, but they thrive. And expanding EFAs sends a clear message that we value families, we value choice, and we're committed to making New Hampshire the best place to live, work, and raise children. This bill makes clear that New Hampshire is putting the best interests of our students first, and not the interests of a system that has failed so many. I respectfully urge you to support SB 295 and give families the tools they need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for coming before us. There's a difference, I think you'd agree, between public schools and private schools, in that public schools have to take all children, including those with special needs, complex medical needs, but private schools don't. How do you feel about using taxpayer dollars for schools that can pick and choose, cherry pick their students, and not accept kids that are not typical or have higher educational needs or medical needs?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would say that we're not picking and choosing schools. We're giving that opportunity to the parents. There are a number of families that have had issues in the traditional public school setting, and public schools don't necessarily accept every child. There are a number of kids that have had issues in the public school system and have been turned away. We've seen this come up repeatedly when it comes to manifest education hardship. And I think that by giving parents the opportunity to find that education, we're really empowering them to actually find somewhere for their child. We all know every child learns differently, and there are a number of kids that would probably be exiting the traditional public school system if it wasn't for the opportunity to go to another school, whether that's through the EFA program or through the charter school.
Further questions? I have one question. You said something interesting in your testimony. Do you consider EFAs to be public education?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would say yes. Right now in state law, we have various pathways to fulfill the mandatory attendance, and this is another one of those pathways. We're simply giving parents the opportunity to choose the direction. We consider charter schools as a public education system. We have traditional local public schools. We allow home education, and then we have education freedom accounts. So I would say this is just as much a part of our public education system.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Scott. Chair recognizes Jane Harrington.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jane Harrington, and I live in Moulton Borough, New Hampshire, and I'm here to state my opposition to SB 295. In my past life, I was a teacher of many subjects in many school systems. As an Army wife of 33 years and 19 moves, who had the privilege and honor to retire in New Hampshire, I just want you to know that I was had to be very flexible in my teaching career. I have lived all over the United States and lived abroad, and I travel extensively with an educational bend in mind. And I don't want you to get into semantics on whether it's voucher or EFA or school choice. What we're talking about is some data, and the data today, ladies and gentlemen, suggests that whether it's been international or national, that vouchers, EMA, does not improve the level of education, and it does cause, and I'm going to just state very quickly, a study of two very similar countries, Sweden and Norway, that went 30 years ago, were identical in culture, in education, in everything. In the 30 years, Sweden went to choice, student choice, voucher system. Norway did not. Today, Sweden's scores have plummeted. Their national opinion of the school system has declined, and there is an increase, which is the greatest fear, an increase in segregation of students by class, by race, by immigration status. Norway continues to flourish. Sweden is spotty at best. I just hope we can learn from these others' mistakes. We don't have to make our own. And I urge you to vote against the increase eligibility of New Hampshire school voucher. I strongly oppose Senate Bill 295. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. No questions? Thank you. Chair recognizes Jen Demmel. Oh, hi.
Good afternoon, Chairman Murphy and members of the committee. I'm Jen Demmel. I'm from Bedford, and I'm here on behalf of I'm the board member of the Granite State Taxpayers. Granite State Taxpayers supports legislation that reduces the financial impact of government on the taxpayer and programs that allocate their costs equitably between beneficiaries of those programs and taxpayers in general. Granite State Taxpayers strongly supports SB 295. From a tax perspective, expanding education freedom accounts by eliminating income eligibility criteria is a fiscally responsible reform. It promises to optimize public funds by introducing market-driven competition in education, incentivizing improved performance in public schools, and reducing long-term local tax burdens. Taxpayers bear an ever-growing financial burden as school spending continues to rise despite declining enrollment. Yet this increased investment has failed to improve educational outcomes. Clearly, taxpayers have an interest in a solution as the school portion of our property tax weighs heavily on taxpayers. EFAs provide a solution by directing the state's share of education funding to families rather than systems, empowering parents to choose the best learning environment for their children. By introducing market-driven competition, EFAs incentivize schools to improve performance, ensuring that funding follows the students and delivers real value for families and taxpayers. As an organization focused on taxpayers, we have listened closely to the concerns about costs, timing, and educational impact. I'm here today because Granite State Taxpayers supports universal EFAs because this market-driven solution will reduce the financial impact of the government on the taxpayers and increase educational value for our children. GST and many other entities have and individuals have spent decades on analysis, debate, and efforts and programs on the school funding debacle. EFAs are the only long game that has risen above the debate and to address the systematic problems in New Hampshire's educational system. EFAs are an exceptionally long-term solution. An analysis that looks at the short terms is short-sighted. What is clear is that the overtime efficiencies should lead to long-term tax benefits for New Hampshire. The current budget environment should not delay progress. Investments in education, educational choice, reduce inefficiencies and empower parents and families, particularly during the times of fiscal constraint. And now is the time and a moment to champion universal EFAs as a tax-efficient approach to educational reform. So Granite State Taxpayers recommends a vote for SB 295, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. No, I don't.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. So Granite State taxpayers are probably interested in property taxes as one element of taxation. But if we say that the average school district cost per pupil is $18,000 and 4,000 plus leaves a district with any child who takes one of these and leaves a public school, but there are no marginal savings, how is there not an increase in property taxes that your organization would be opposing?
Analogies are always dangerous, but at the same time, this is like if you have, if your windows are, costing so much that your heating bill is going through the roof, you have to at some point replace the windows. And not, this isn't getting rid of the schools. This isn't doing anything. This is focusing on financially putting the money where it's market driven, and so that we can have efficiencies in the system. So there will be some costs at the beginning and upfront to get to the point that we can have a good in the long game. This is a long-term solution, and this will be more efficient long-term.
Questions? Senator Alston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I'm hearing you've mentioned the term market-driven a number of times, and I'd like to know where the Granite State taxpayers, where the services and its service to community that is constitutionally bound for the schools, that we are constitutionally bound to provide a free and adequate education to all students. And we know that not all students have the same needs. So they're not like windows, they're not interchangeable, because some students have special education needs that are far more expensive. So how do you apply market-driven to an educational outcome for all of our students, because we are constitutionally bound to provide for everybody?
Well, yes, this is about the educational outcome, because obviously the outcomes are decreasing as our costs are increasing. Taking off the Granite State taxpayer's hat and putting on the mom hat of, I have a daughter who was told she's hard of hearing, so she was told she was special needs and needed to go to a special needs school. This is the same, and I was like, whoa, this girl, I could see the potential in her, they could not. And I chose not to take her out of the public school and give her the education she needed. When she was a sophomore in high school, she had finished calculus, finished organic chem, and went off to college at 16. This was not a special needs child. They could see only one aspect of her. And as a parent, you can see that, and you can see the potential in your child and see what your child needs. And so for a very, you can customize their education, fit their needs, and get a much better outcome for your child.
Other questions, please?
May I follow up?
Well,
Thank you. So I'm glad that you mentioned educational outcomes, because as a policy, right, everyone's got their individual experiences, which all feed into our general experience. But as a policy for everybody, we want to find out what the outcomes are, like you had a successful outcome, right? That's where do the Granite State taxpayers see those outcomes measured? Where's the data that shows you how these individual students that are accessing this program, that there's no reporting after they go into the program? Where are you getting the data? Because we don't have it.
Right now, we have the data of the public schools failing our students.
Senator Hess.
I just want to make a quick comment. I may be out of line, but I'm going to do so. I think we're asking some of the witnesses questions that are outside their areas of expertise, and I think it's unfair to them to put them in positions that are difficult. Thank you.
So noted. Seeing no other questions, you're excused. Chair recognizes Ms. Paula Young.
Hello, my name is Paula Young. I'm a retired librarian and I live in Moulton Borough, New Hampshire. I'm here to read a statement from my neighbor, Dr. Eric Swenson, who had to attend a conference out of the country today. I agree with everything that's in the statement, though. Here's Dr. Swenson's testimony.
Ms. Young,
My name,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you have a copy of the testimony?
yes, I have 10 copies, sir.
It's already been distributed to the committee. If you'd like to summarize it quickly and briefly, and we can read it. So you don't need to read the whole,
Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
you don't need to read the whole thing. We have it.
Oh, you don't want me to read it? Okay.
No, ma'am, please. If you'd like to summarize a few lines, by all means, we're here at your service, but we can read it.
Okay.
All right, any questions? Thank you
Mr.
very
Chair, if people are traveling all the way from out of state, can we allow them to use their 3 minutes?
I have no objection to your.
Yeah,
3 minutes.
so she didn't understand.
I understand. You are entitled to sit for 3 minutes, and we're happy to hear what you have to say. I was just asking you not to read the testimony word for word.
You came 2 hours here.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm very hard of hearing. I do my best, okay? Okay, so here is Dr. Swenson's testimony. My name is Eric Swenson, and I live in Moulton Borough. As a physician and educator for over 40 years, and one who benefited greatly from a public school education, I strongly oppose Senate Bill 295. This is a bill which will use my tax dollars to provide vouchers to pay tuition at private schools for many children whose parents are already well enough to afford a private tuition. If taken to its extreme, as to be the case in many other states, it will deplete funds necessary to maintain the high standards we seek in our New Hampshire public schools. Diverting money in this fashion and not maintaining full continuing funding of public education will have an intended or unintended effect a deterioration of Granite State public schools in a downward, self-fulfilling prophecy. Private schools will not and cannot provide education to all, or even be affordable to many students from rural areas and those with parents living paycheck to paycheck. If public schools are not funded adequately, the results will be a poorer education for those students in public schools, which proponents of this bill will then use as evidence that we must further increase voucher support. State support of public education for all was a bedrock principle and goal of our country at its founding and helped to make the United States a wonder of the world in public literacy and accomplishment. Please let New Hampshire, a founding state in this union of the United States of America, not abdicate its long-held principle of high-quality, free education for all students. And let us not hand over our public monies to those who are fortunate enough to have sufficient wealth to afford a private education. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Rosen.
So, Moulton Borough is the best funded school district in the state.
It's a good school system.
I'm sure it is. It's the best funded school district in the state. But my question is, are you aware that New Hampshire ranks last in per pupil spending among all the 50 states when you look at our state overall?
Ask me the question again.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Seeing none, thank you, ma'am. Chair recognizes Bernadette Ensley. I do that.
Greetings, members of the community. My name is Bernadette Ensley, and I am a home educator of 5 children in the city of Merrimack. I just moved up here this summer after several years of planning and preparation. I have family up here. I went to school here in Manchester, and I wanted my children to grow up with the seasons, with their cousins, and to be able to hike and explore the beautiful trails here. When we came up here, we had to stretch our finances like you wouldn't believe. There's not much to choose from for a single income household with 5 children. We were up against retirees and people buying second homes. We needed a safe neighborhood with a big yard for our kids to be outside, a room to homeschool, a room for my husband to work. This came at a very high price. But we thought we could make it work if we had a scholarship to help us with our books and schoolroom furniture. We were totally surprised when we found out we made too much money. The only house we could afford needs a lot of repairs, and we had to borrow from family and our Florida homeschool scholarship, which is not income-based, to scramble and get curriculum this fall. This scholarship is really a need for our family. I think New Hampshire is a fantastic place to homeschool children, only it is so expensive for families. The taxes are so high, we're at a giant disadvantage to empty nesters and retirees. Our kids are going to be the next generation that works here in New Hampshire, raises their own families here in New Hampshire, and continues the proud New Hampshire heritage that makes this state unique. If we sent our kids to public school, no one would ask our income.
It's only fair that we should have the same access to state education funding other families have. Please vote to remove these unfair income restrictions so that all families can have the freedom to give their kids their best education. Thank you.
Any questions of Ms. Sensen? Seeing none, thank you very much. Chair recognizes Mr. Leonard Witt. Trying. Mr. Witt, we do have your testimony as well.
I will read it as she read hers. Thank you, Senator Murphy. My name, and because I'm making a couple changes in here too. So my name is Leonard Witt. I live in Sandwich, New Hampshire, and I oppose SB 295. As youngsters, my brother, sister, and I all attended public schools, kindergarten through high school. Public education allowed us to be the first generation in our extended family to attend college and lead successful lives. My 2 adult children attended public schools K-12, which also were the gateway for them to lead their successful lives. And our only grandchild also attends a public school. So when it comes to paying property taxes for public education, I always thought of it as a way of a payback for all the possibilities public schools provided for our family and for the vast majority of the families in this building, in New Hampshire, and statewide. I never thought in my long life I'd be asked to pay high property taxes to enable the richest among us to attend private schools while diverting my tax dollars away from the public schools that helped everyone in our family succeed and which really made America the great nation it has been. The voucher, EFA, call it whatever, semantics, education and taxpayer imbalance is especially awful in rural towns and counties in New Hampshire. According to the New Hampshire Department of Education, Carroll County, where I live and pay my taxes, there are just two non-public schools. One in Wolfboro, Brewster Academy. The sticker price for day students is $43,000 a year. No one I know can afford $43,000 even with your voucher. That only goes to the wealthiest families. And the other option in this county is a Christian school in Ossipee with about 6 K-8 teachers. And if you don't follow their line of Christianity, you don't go to their school. At the same time, there are 5,000 students enrolled in Carroll County public schools. And attending those public schools, just because there's not very many other choices, is the best and really only choice the vast majority of their parents have. On the other hand, if you come down to Hillsborough County, which is geographically smaller than Carroll County, it has nearly 50 non-public schools, 2 in Carroll County, 50 in Hillsborough. All our rural resources will be diverted to urban kids, many from wealthy families. The kids who will suffer the most are the 52% of children, for example, on the free or reduced lunch program at rural schools like Brett Elementary School in Tamworth. As state money is diverted to urban and private religious schools, rural property taxpayers like me bear the unfair burden of indirectly subsidizing urban children, when in fact that money should be subsidizing the schools in our rural communities to ensure our rural children have all the success that my family and so many of us others have had. For those reasons, I strongly oppose SB 295, and I ask each of you as stewards of our public institutions paid for with our tax dollars to vote against this bill.
Any questions? Mr. Witt? Seeing none, thank you, sir. You're excused. Chair recognizes Mr. Kevin Gurley.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kevin Gurley from Manchester, New Hampshire. I have 2 boys that have been going to private school, and for the last 7 years. You mentioned that there is no data. I can tell you that one of the main reasons why we switched was because of the structure and, and the lower class size, which actually increased in their grades. Our family is right on the financial income line. We barely are accepted for the educational freedom account. And that being said, I am in favor of this bill.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of Mr. Gurley? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Chair recognize Mr. Tom Rand.
Hello there, I'm Tom Randall from another person from Moulton Borough. The first thing I'd like to say is, as you can tell, I've got a British accent, but I have lived here for 15 years. And I think this is a great process of allowing everyone to turn up and give their views. Of everyone's opinions. I won't take too long. I'm not going to talk about the impact on educational attainment, where there's different views. I'm not going to talk about additional costs from this measure. I oppose this bill. I'm going to talk about my experience when I moved here 15 years ago with 2 kids who went to the local school, who sometimes got the bus, sometimes cycled. At a pinch, you could walk. You were within walking or cycling distance of a lot of your friends. We were integrated into the local community through getting involved in the local school. And it was a fantastic part of building a community. And I feel that this proposal undermines local public schools, and therefore it undermines something that's very important to local communities. I don't think that the education freedom accounts, I mean, it's been talked about, I don't think that it really is expanding freedom. Better off families can already afford to go to the private schools. The local public schools can't afford to have this money taken away. As explained, they have fixed costs, and it just means they're going to have to reduce teachers and lower the standard of care for the standard of education for the kids that are left behind. And I feel that it's almost a state subsidy. Rather than about freedom, it's really about a subsidy to better off families and the state. To conclude, I would say that small towns and their public schools are a great asset of New Hampshire. It's why we moved here. And I think it's something that's very special about the Granite State, and therefore my suggestion would be to oppose the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Chair recognizes Mr. Paul Edgar. Where we?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. It's a great privilege to be able to speak like this. The live free or die state. I've been here for 50 years and really appreciate the freedom embodied in the culture of New Hampshire. And educational freedom accounts. What is freedom? Where does freedom come into it? The freedom comes into it in being able to support your worldview with the education of your children. And similarly, not being forced to subsidize a competing worldview which you don't support. Education is not a neutral area. We often talk like it is. You know, reading, writing, arithmetic, these are all neutral areas. Not so. There's a worldview embodied in every subject, in every fact. I work at a school, a small Christian school in Somersworth, New Hampshire, and people sacrifice to send their children there. Why do they do that? They do that because they want their children instructed in a worldview that's compatible and aligned with the worldview they have at their home. I would like to reverse this argument of taxpayer subsidy of private schools. In fact, I see it very much the opposite, and so do the parents I serve. They would say they are subsidizing a worldview taught by the public schools that they don't support, and they are forced to subsidize that through their tax dollars. The EFA concept and expanding it to universal eligibility is a movement towards freedom. Live free or die. And I'd like to conclude my remarks with quoting a scripture verse. Now, just doing that, I know in this very room, there'd be some that has no place here. We're not interested in hearing that. That proves my point. All of us have different worldviews, and freedom is not being compelled to subsidize a competing worldview from your own. The scripture verse that I wanted to share is, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Education is not a neutral entity. It's very much specific to the families embracing it. And we seek to have a free education system where there is choice and we're not compelled to subsidize worldviews that we don't embrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar. Any questions? Seeing none. Excuse. Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Ms. Doris Hennessy.
Good afternoon, Chairman Murphy, members of the committee. I'm Doris Owensy, a former school board member from Nashua. I oppose this bill. I do agree with the gentleman before us. Ideology matters. It's far too soon to consider expanding a program where we don't have the data. But this part I do know. EFAs are not going to help the public schools. It's not a level playing field. Public schools are way down with state and federal mandates. Private schools don't have mandates, at least not yet, which is why state funding should not go to private schools. With EFAs, private and homeschool regulation is guaranteed to follow for the sake of transparency and accountability. Rather than spend what looks like $100 million in bailout money for universal EFAs, which is what the legislator ought to be doing, is deregulating public schools. The mess is currently due to state regulation and accepting federal money with attached strings. The legislature should require districts to get back to basics, provide a traditional academic instruction without disruptive federal mandates. No more indoctrination of students with political ideas instead of focusing on ABCs. It's not a student's job to dismantle racism or evaluate whether he is privileged or oppressed. Restore phonics and arithmetic, eliminate Common Core. Let the districts continue with failed agendas if they want, but require districts to provide one clear, equitable path for students to get an adequate academic education without behavior modification programs such as social emotional learning, which is interwoven into the entire curriculum, denying parents a remedy in law as they can no longer opt out of such material if deemed objectionable. Without student values, attitudes, and beliefs being surveyed and questioned in classrooms and via online software, without informed written consent from parents as required by state law, parents no longer have a remedy in law at finding these materials objectionable or invasive of family privacy rights. Without school teachers and psychologists providing counseling and mental health therapy in group or individual settings without parental notification or consent, creating yet another problem without remedy in law. Without data mining, the selling or sharing of student information to vendors, it's a serious privacy concern for families. Despite a recent constitutional amendment protecting privacy, there's no remedy in law providing instruction that doesn't collect or share or sell student data. Get simple, get back to basics, provide academic instruction in private school, traditional grading, not inequitable competency grading. Promotion to the next grade must be earned, not automatic. Merit matters. Restore discipline, not restorative justice experiments. Allow parents to review all course materials and grade protocols in advance. Establish a path for academic instruction without the nonsense. Or, and here's the kicker, require the district to fund academic instruction acceptable to parents outside the district. There's your funding. There's no need for state EFAs. If the district is doing an adequate job, students won't need them. With the cooperation, the EFA program can be phased out and doesn't need to be used for private schooling. This legislature allowed the department and districts to accept federal funds in exchange for mandates that would otherwise be considered illegal for the federal government to demand. Stop the nonsense. Get back to basics. The responsibility is on your shoulders to do what is right. Stop the sellout of public education to federal agendas before those agendas destroy our private schools too. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? Seeing none. You're excused. Chair recognizes Ms. Angelique Donan. Should I spell that correctly? Said that correctly?
Hi. That was close. Angelique Donati. I am here in support of this bill. I am a single mom with 2 kids attending Bishop Brady High School here in Concord. I chose Bishop Brady because it is a very good school and it has a faith-based education, which is what I wanted for my children. I do not qualify for EFA. So when I hear others say, we're rich people who can, just flip the bill for private school, for me, it comes with a sacrifice, and I work very hard to support my children. And I pay a lot of money in property tax. I don't know if anyone else feels like they pay a lot of money in property tax, but certainly I do. And I am in support of this bill.
Mr. Donati, I want to make sure for the A that I get your name correct. It's Donati, D-O-N-A-T-I. Thanks very much. Any questions? Thank you for testimony.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. David Trumbull. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware, and I oppose this bill for a couple reasons. First of all, the EFA program is a discretionary program. There is no constitutional mandate for the New Hampshire or any state to fund private schools. However, we do have the New Hampshire Constitution and the Claremont decision that have made it clear we do have a constitutional mandate to fund our public schools. And they educate over 90% of the children in our state. I'd like to look at the issue of saving money. We've heard about how if a child goes from a public school to a private school, it saves money. The latest data from the Department of Education of New Hampshire is there were 493 students in the program who are switchers. That's it. There are 500 public schools in New Hampshire. It's pretty much one child per school on average. And that has been verified by the superintendent in my town. If you lose one child in your school, you're not going to fire any teachers. Your costs of running the school are not going to change. There's no savings whatsoever. The study that was cited from the Bartlett Center that came out today says it was only going to cost $15 million. That's on top of the 30 you're already spending. So you're really looking at $40 or $50 million. But that study assumes that only 2,500 students will ever additionally join the EFA program. We have 5,000 now. 2,500. That means for every 2 in the program now, you're only going to add 1 student. It's not that many people. There isn't a movement to flee the public schools. People are satisfied with them, 90%. We are number 5 in the country with our public schools. The problem with the EFA program, though, is billed as choice, but it's not choice for all people. Let's look at a couple categories. First is special education. Over 20% of public school students receive special ed services, but only 6% of the students in the voucher or EFA program receive special education. When they sign up for that program, the first thing they must do is sign away their right to a free and appropriate education. They give up their right to due process, and they give up the right to the least restrictive environment under the federal education law. If you look at the statements of non-discrimination of many of the private schools in the EFA program, the standard statement of non-discrimination, they have lifted the word disability out of those statements. They are preserving their right to discriminate. They refuse to take all children. So it's not choice for all. Let's look at ELL students. There are zero in the program right now, but there are 5,000 ELL students in New Hampshire. It's not a choice program for everybody. Look at children from low incomes. The average cost of a private school in New Hampshire is $21,600, $14,000 for elementary and $31,000 for high school. Low-income families cannot afford to participate even if they get a $4,000 voucher. Look at Arizona, and that's the one state that's cited in this Bartlett study. The low-income zip codes, you have 1 EFA student per 100 children in that district. In the higher income zip codes, you have 28 students in the EFA programs. This is a program that statistically overall, you can always find examples here and there, but statistically overall, it's an exclusionary program. Low-income families will not be able to participate. ELL students don't get to participate. Students with disabilities, certainly those with complex disabilities that cost a lot of money, don't get to participate. At the Universal Voucher EFA hearing 2 weeks ago in the House, the principal of that school from Carroll County was asked a question by one of the Republican state reps. What do you do about special ed? And she said, we don't offer it at our school. It's not an equal choice program for everybody. It ends up having the haves and the have-nots. Every dollar that's in the education trust fund that's going to use to go to this program, it's going to be 40 or 50 million after you pass this, is $1 less for the public schools. Now, I said schools in New Hampshire are number 5 in the country. That's a statewide average. We all know the problem in New Hampshire is the disparity between the rich towns and the not so rich towns. Those are the towns that need our help. If you think you have $40 or $50 million extra, I urge you to come up with some kind of targeted aid proposal to help the schools that need the help now, rather than to adopt this program, which is discretionary and not constitutionally required. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Trumbull? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes Ms. Bobby Acton. Bobby Acton? Okay. We will move on. Miss Leahy. Oh, we have a taker.
We've been here a minute. Hi, my name is Leah Leahy. I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. I'd like to contrast really quickly my own homeschool education experience here in New Hampshire with the one that I am currently able to provide for my son because of the education freedom accounts. Growing up here, my parents were very careful with my brothers and my education to choose the pathway that worked best for us. And my dad worked a full-time and 2 part-time jobs, and my mom worked 2 part-time jobs in order to make that happen. My brothers my older brothers went to private school, but they worked part-time jobs and helped pay for their own education. My younger brothers and I were homeschooled, and we chose curriculum that best fit our learning styles and would enable us to thrive. And sometimes, for one curriculum in particular, it's a literature-based history, geography program. And my mom would buy the teacher's guide only and utilize the library to get the supplemental literature that went with that curriculum. And if a book was not available through the library or interlibrary loan, we would skip that part of the curriculum. But because of the education freedom accounts, I am able to purchase the entire literature pack for my son and then use the library for supplemental digging deeper when he's interested in a topic. And I am so excited for the opportunities that EFAs are opening, the doors that the EFA accounts are opening for my children. And I think that this should be an equal opportunity to every family in New Hampshire, that they should be able to choose the education that is going to fit their child best and not be limited by their own personal financial resources to be able to provide a high quality education to their children. Because they can afford to stay home and homeschool their children, or they can afford to get their kids to a private school and maybe pay the difference from what, or pay for it, but they shouldn't be limited because they don't have access to this fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leahy. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am. Chair recognizes Ms. Patty Long.
I've shortened mine.
Thank you.
So, Chair and members of the Education Finance Committee, thank you so much for your attention to my very important concerns about SB 295. Let me introduce myself. I'm Patty Long from Peterborough. I'm a retired public school teacher and a parent of 2 daughters who attended Catholic school and public school, and a son who went to the public school. I have provided each of you a copy of the Children's Scholarship Fund expenditures for September 2022 to June 2023 for EFAs. While I have serious concerns about the allowable expenses, it's open to the page that I want you to look at. While I have serious concerns about the allowable expenses, I am even more concerned about the removal of the income gap given the unrestricted use of the funds. Looking over the list as a teacher, I was surprised to learn the expenditures were not solely used for tuition for private schools or research-based curriculum programs provided by the state for homeschoolers. The most concerning section is tuition and fees for summer education. These programs that were paid with EFA monies, they were used for dance, gymnastics, violin lessons, religious overnight camps. Oh, and Pat's Peak, the ski area. And the list goes on. It totaled $500,000. The expenditure for Pat's Peak alone was for $18,000 for 93 students. I'm concerned when the income cap is removed, what will be the expenditure for Pat's Peak when every student in New Hampshire who attends a private school, a religious school, or a homeschool receives an EFA voucher. Bishop Burton is a Catholic high school with 700 students enrolled. Of these 700 students, right now, 106 currently qualify for the $5,000 voucher, totaling $530,000. Without an income cap, New Hampshire taxpayers will now be burdened by providing $5,000 for all Bishop Burton students, a total of $3.5 million. And that's just one school. Scale it up for every student attending private school and homeschoolers, and you can understand why reaching Higher New Hampshire projection of $102 million for the next school year. I am extremely concerned about this expenditure amount going forward for New Hampshire taxpayers if the cap is removed. What is shocking is that on the Bishop Burton website, under the word scholarship, it reads, I would like your attention, it reads, the Children's Scholarship Fund provides scholarships averaging more than $5,000 per student for low-income New Hampshire children. Today, it said income limits for EFA programs are increasing this week. It is important to point, EFAs are not a scholarship. They are funded by New Hampshire taxpayers' hard-earned money. And more importantly, each dollar that is given to an EFA is a dollar being diverted from our public school funding. Before this committee determines whether or not to remove the income cap for EFAs, taxpayers need more transparency that these expenditures are directly impacting students' learning outcomes. When I taught third grade and it was budget time, teachers were required to identify the Common Core state standard of every single item we were purchasing and how it would directly impact student learning outcomes. Taxpayers want monitoring of how the EFA funds are spent, and more importantly, a vehicle to determine children's learning. All public school students are held accountable, and so should any student who is receiving taxpayer dollars from the state. There should be one portal for EFA recipients for their test scores, similar to the portals for public school students. I want everybody to listen to this. EF funds are coming from all taxpayers that are actually in this room. All of us are paying for this, along with the rest of New Hampshire taxpayers. If the cap is removed, we will be giving a family of 4 approximately $20,000 a year, which will they deposit in their class wallet account to supplement their children's tuition. When my daughters were younger, they went to St. Patrick's School. They had piano lessons. They went to gymnastics, and they too skied at Pat's Peak. I did not ask my neighbors to pay for their school or winter and summer activities. It was my choice, so I paid for it. In essence, this is what you are asking by removing the household income thresholds. In closing, senators, I strongly urge you to vote against removing household income thresholds for the EFAs. New Hampshire cannot afford to invest any more money into an initiative that is already bankrupting our public schools, taxpayers, communities, and will ultimately bankrupt our beautiful state of New Hampshire.
Thank you for your testimony.
Do you have any questions?
Any questions of the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for this opportunity for me to speak to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Alyssa Sosa Molina.
Hello, I'm a senior in high school and my name is Alyssa Sosa Molina. I have been a recipient of the EFA and Children's Scholarship Fund for 4 years now, and I'm also one of their ambassadors, and I know many other kids in the program. I'm here today to share with you a brief statement about the kids who are unable to get an EFA right now, and how this bill will affect them. Many of them I know personally. To give you a brief summary of my testimony, I grew up being homeschooled by my single mom until I came of high school age. For the last 3 years, I've been able to attend, because of the EFA, a private school that has afforded me much growth, opportunities, and a brighter future. I would never have been able to attend this school without this EFA, and I would be in a very different situation right now. There are kids right now who are in schools bullied, stuck in toxic environments, stuck at a level with everyone else, unable to reach their full potential when they could be excelling, like me, because I went to private school, at different levels and subjects they are naturally gifted in, like mathematics or history or science. Or maybe they are experiencing the opposite, which I also know personally, where they're academically challenged, struggling to keep up with everyone else. Personally, their confidence and self-worth being torn down, leaving them questioning, why can't I just be like everyone else? These kids are in a disposition in their life that is entirely out of their control or their choices. They don't get to choose their family's income. I know mine didn't. How they were born or how other people will treat them. There are hundreds of kids like this in New Hampshire who face these realities daily. Unfortunately, for whatever reason and for each child, the public school system just isn't working for them, which is why they need the EFA. The EFA will give these kids positive changes, better opportunities, growth, and achievement for a better life. I would know, as I'm personally one of them. SB 295 will continue and grow this much-needed change. If you pass this bill, we will be making the EFA accessible to all, regardless of their family's income. We'll give these kids a chance to attain the life they deserve, better opportunities to create a better future, and in turn, a better life. Because just as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. These kids deserve a chance like that, as I'm grateful because I have been given that chance. And they might just change the world when we do give that to them. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Deborah House.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman Murphy and members of the Senate Education Finance Committee. It's a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. My name is Deborah Howes. I am the president of the American Federation of Teachers and I'm here to oppose SB 295. I will summarize some points from my written testimony, then hand it in. I also send it to you in email because there are some links in there in case you want to follow up on the research. We are opposed to SB 295. Every child in the Granite State has the right to the opportunity to a robust public education. That's right in our Constitution. And I say robust because they have the right to small class sizes with plenty of attention from a certified professional teacher, academic support from a paraprofessional if they need it, and a full range of subjects to study that prepare them fully for life after graduation, whether that's in the workforce, in the service, going on to higher education, and full civic participation in their communities. And it is the state's responsibility to fund that. And that's where we run into a problem because that has not been satisfactorily solved in, the 30 years since, our funding method has been found unconstitutional. And I will correct my honorable friend, Senator Rosenwald. We are not last in funding of education, but we're last in state funding, state contribution to our funding of education. The problem is spending on vouchers is spending of choice. Spending on public education is something you have to do. And we need to make sure that the education that students can get, the 155,000 of them relying on our public schools, that they can get is robust in every single district across the state. So we really cannot be talking about expanding this program, which is spending of choice, until we have solved the problem of public education funding so that every school district has that adequate education for all of its students. A few more things I want to mention. I heard that the Department of Education has decided that this will only cost an additional $15 million if it passes. I'm a little leery of their estimates because they said the original program the voucher program was going to cost $129,000 the first year and $2 million the next. Those estimates were wildly off. The projection I've seen of $102 million per year in spending is a worst case scenario because we have to assume that everyone who can use it will. When you are forming a budget, you have to look at what the cost could be at maximum because you could have 100% take up. Who is going to turn down money when it's being put on in front of them on a plate? Just a little bit more, a few more points. We heard about what voters want. Well, a bipartisan RABA research poll of New Hampshire voters conducted in January 2025, 78% of voters do not approve of taking public money and using it for private educational choices instead of strengthening public schools. 74% said they do not want existing school voucher program expanded, and link of that will be accessible through my testimony. So in short, we oppose expanding the voucher program, and we really want you to focus on strengthening all of our district public schools so they can all provide the small class sizes and individual attention you have heard people speak passionately about. Thank you.
The links that you provide in the email that you sent to us, does it include the questions and how they were asked, or is it just aggregated?
That will be for the RABA research post. You will see the questions as well as the little graph and everything. Yeah, the responses. Yeah.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Chair organizes Joe Mundy. Mr. Mundy.
Do you need an intern or something to help you?
Hello. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening to my comments. There's a copy of my written testimony coming around. A lot of what I was intending to say has been said, so I'll just reiterate. My name is Joe Mundy. I've been a New Hampshire public school educator and administrator since 2010, working in the districts of Pelham, Londonderry, Amherst, and Salem. I speak for myself today and do not formally represent any of the districts where I have worked, but I do believe, and I am in opposition to this bill. I do believe this bill will continue to undermine the work of New Hampshire's public schools, which serve a substantial majority of our school-age population. I said 85%, but I've always heard today up to 95% of our students are educated with this system, supported by the local tax bases. At the end of the day, a person's choice to send their child to a private school or homeschool them is just that. It's their choice. It's often the result as well of them having the means to do so. The idea that this financial burden should be shouldered by the public taxpayers in those communities is absurd. Our public schools serve our public. And with 90% of them there, I would say we're talking about taking money from everyone to give to the few. And in this case, we're talking about programs, schools, and situations that are not beholden to state oversight, standards, accreditation, or anything like that. So again, I'm in strong opposition to this bill, and I would hope that the committee would listen to their constituents here. And we're talking about representing the needs of 90% of our students. So it seems pretty obvious that the majority should get the support. So I'm opposed of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mundy, for taking my question. You testified that you are a public school educator and administrator. So in your capacity as an educator and administrator, when you are exploring curricula for your students or materials to support that curriculum, how much latitude are you free as a teacher of a subject matter to purchase curricula or supporting materials just because that's what you feel is great for your students, or do you have to run that through a process?
No, there's a process to find the materials that we would use. It would go through, we'd be looking for research-based materials, and it'd go through a sequence of discussion and committee work before it would get to the point of being introduced as curriculum. And so, yeah, there'd be a lot of collaboration, and you'd go through administrative approvals and ultimately through the school board and approval there in order to do something like that.
Further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Mundy.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Dr. Sidney Leggett. Me too.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dr. Sidney Leggett. I'm currently the superintendent of schools for the Plainfield and Cornish school districts in the Upper Valley region of New Hampshire. I'm also speaking today from myself as somebody who started as an educator in New Hampshire in 1994. So I've been around the state for a long time. I also am the proud mother of 3 kids who attended New Hampshire schools. I'm writing to express my strong opposition to SB 295, which seeks to expand the education freedom accounts, or EFAs, or vouchers, whatever we'd like to call them today, to all families without eligibility criteria. New Hampshire has a long valued self-reliance, a history of self-reliance, local control, and community responsibility, but this proposal threatens to undermine our public education system and our state's finances by diverting taxpayer dollars away from public schools. I urge you to reject SB 295 based on 3 key concerns that I'm going to go over: the financial burden, the lack of accountability and transparency, and the fundamental opposition to New Hampshire in general. First, the financial impact of this bill is staggering. The EFAs, or vouchers, cost New Hampshire taxpayers more than $25 million for the current school year and have accumulated over $73 million since 2021. This could potentially reach over $100 million if expanded. These funds, which should be strengthening education for all students, instead subsidize private education, leaving public schools, particularly in areas like mine that are rural and economically disadvantaged and critically underfunded. We've already seen the state not fulfill its responsibility to provide its commitment to special education funding this year in the amount of $17 million. And all of those costs are going to be downshifted to local taxpayers again. This expansion makes it even more difficult and honestly sometimes impossible for taxpayers to stay in their homes in these areas in New Hampshire. It threatens the existence of our small rural schools, and these are a large part of what makes New Hampshire, New Hampshire. There's a lot of analyses that have been mentioned today about what this might cost next year and what might cost another year. I don't even want to talk about analyses because those can be all over the map. I would rather, instead of analyses, talk about reality. If we look at reality, the universal expansion of voucher programs in Arizona are the cause of half of its state's deficit right now. That's reality. That's not a projection. That's what actually happened. In Indiana, $500 million has increased their deficit since they went to universal expansion. So let's talk about real numbers, not about what a study thinks it might be. Second, the EFA program lacks accountability, transparency, and oversight. If there is one thing that I know about New Hampshire taxpayers after working in schools this long, is that New Hampshire taxpayers want to know where their money's going. As a school district leader, I am bound to adhere to strict accountability measures while the voucher programs operate with very minimal regulation. At each board meeting and at each annual meeting, I present information that accounts for all funds spent. I answer all questions that all taxpayers have about where there is money going, and whenever possible, about the efficacy of the use of those funds. An initial audit of the New Hampshire voucher program found that 24% of applications had inconsistencies, including inaccurate residency and income verification. Taxpayer money is currently, right now, at risk for fraud and misuse, and I know that New Hampshire taxpayers would not agree to that. Most importantly, at the heart of all public dollars for education is that students should be learning. EFA program has no accountability for learning. The public has been denied the right to know what their tax dollars are going towards and if they're being used appropriately and effectively. Actual studies of voucher programs have shown that the larger the program, the worse the results. An expansion of voucher programs will show that. We demand accountability from our public schools, and we want to hold all programs to the same standard. Any expansion of this program only exacerbates this already high lack of transparency. Finally, public education is a cornerstone of our democracy, ensuring equal opportunity and access for all children. These voucher programs prioritize individual gain over the collective good, and EFAs actually offer an avenue to discriminate based on religion, disability, socioeconomics, race, and other factors. The first longitudinal study of voucher programs out of Stanford University shows that racial segregation has increased 69% since 1988. It also shows that socioeconomic discrimination has increased 50% since 1991. I want you to think about the following to illustrate the harm of this proposal, and I'm just going to offer a very simple analogy. Our public schools could be thought of like our public roads. They are built to serve everyone, they're funded by all of us, and they're essential to our collective well-being. They need to be safe and they need to be ready to travel. Roads, like education, are public goods, and they guarantee access to all without exclusion, and that the use by one or some doesn't diminish the use by others. What SB 295 proposes is akin to taking public funds to build private highways, accessible to only a few and excluding others. And this is not the New Hampshire way. Our resources must be used to strengthen the public infrastructure that we all rely on, not to subsidize private choices at a public expense. I want you to imagine if taxpayers were paying their tax bill for New Hampshire roads, and then they found out that that money was going to individuals to build their own roads that nobody else can travel on. And then when the taxpayers ask if they can see those roads, they're told that they're not allowed to. And then when they asked to see if there was proof that they were built, they were told that they can't see that proof. And there's actually no evidence that can be shown to say that they're even safe to travel. I can't imagine any New Hampshire taxpayer being okay with this when they write their check to the town hall. New Hampshire schools are the roads that take our children into the future. Any investment in public education must go to the roads that can be accessed by everyone. I urge you to uphold the values of fairness, fiscal responsibility, and community investment by rejecting SB 295. Public schools deserve our full support, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Leggett. Andreas.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I've been in higher education for 34 years, as a dean, as a professor. I've seen the outcome of New Hampshire K-12 schools for the last 17 years. And looking at some of the data, I also see, adjusting for inflation, since 2001, spending in our schools has doubled. So taxpayers are on the hook for that. And yet outcomes haven't improved. Why have the costs gone up so much? And why aren't we seeing better outcomes in our public schools? I am a product of public schools. I've only worked at public schools. My kids only went to public schools. I'm a supporter of public schools, so don't get me wrong.
Well, I would like to, first of all, say that I want outcomes to be the best that they can be as well. And if you look nationally, New Hampshire is doing well. We are, I heard somebody say fifth and somebody else said seventh, but we are doing well around the nation. And I would also say that more money is going into public schools because there are a lot more mandates that are unfunded, right? So there are a lot more things that we have to do absolutely every day in public schools that we're required to pay for that fall on local taxpayer dollars. In terms of outcome, what we need and what also has been proven by research is that schools that are better funded perform better. And New Hampshire is 50th in the United States, dead last, for the state support of our public schools.
I think that's true of UNH as well.
Yes, it is. It's a comprehensive New Hampshire problem. But what I'd also like to say is, yes, I would like the outcomes to be better too, and that's what I work for every day. But if money is going to go towards anything, I want it to go towards that will affect everybody as opposed to just going towards a few people. I don't want to see the money diverted away from, I think, what seems to be a common goal. Thank you for your question.
Further questions, Dr. Altshuler? Sorry, Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your testimony. As a superintendent, it's your responsibility to set up a budget for your school. So over the past 10 years, have you noticed an increase in the money that's downshifted that you have to be responsible to present to your taxpayers, that the state doesn't pay for retirement costs, special education costs that then add to our per pupil costs?
Yes, absolutely. I can tell you that in my two districts, I'm a superintendent of two districts, and in both districts, we are presenting negative budgets. They are lower than last year, and our taxes will increase. And it's hard to explain that to the community, but we are cutting our budgets, and the taxpayer will be paying more because we are not getting revenues.
Senator Carson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you for hanging in there. I know it's kind of late. Are you aware of Article 28A of the New Hampshire Constitution?
Can you explain? Can you elaborate on which one I might be?
Article 28A says that the state cannot have a mandate to anybody, anywhere, any program, anything without paying for it. So you had said, you've talked about downshifting of costs. You said that the state has mandated. If the state has mandated, the state must pay for it. And I'm wondering if there might be a little confusion about the use of the word mandate as opposed to making something available. Because we pass legislation all the time on different things that we think is a good idea, but we leave it up to the districts to decide whether or not they want to do that. Because that's one way of getting out of a mandate. That, listen, we think this is a great idea, but we're going to leave it up to you to decide whether or not you want to do this in your district. So maybe there's just a little bit of misunderstanding about what these are, whether it's a mandate or it's something that's enabling a district to do something. Because as you know, New Hampshire's a home rule state. Any local government can't do whatever they want to do. They need to get permission from the state. So if something is enabling, you can look at it and say, we think this is a great idea. We're going to do it. But that is where the district makes the decision that they're going to pay for it because the state is not going to. So that's why I questioned you about your testimony concerning mandates, where the state is mandating as opposed to enabling. So just, I guess mostly a comment from me more than anything else. May I continue, Mr. Chairman?
I would like to respond.
There's a question here.
Okay. That's the one.
Okay. And I don't know if I should say thank you for the question or thank you for the comment, but thank you either way. I think unfunded mandate is something that New Hampshire is unfortunately known for. I mean, there are a lot of things that just trickle down to the local taxpayer. So I think it might sound nice in theory, but it's not true in reality. Two quick examples are the special education aid. You know, this year there's a $17 million shortfall of special education that won't be going to schools, but we are all mandated to require that we offer special education. And I'll give you a second example from one of my two districts that is in desperate need of a school facility. There are ED 320 rules that say exactly how my facility has to be for the well-being of students, and the state isn't going to pay for a cent of that.
May I respond?
It's a question, Senator?
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into it. We'll discuss it during executive session. I think it's probably
Thank you, Senator Carson.
better. I'm just gonna say, I think that the answers to your questions are very complicated, and we really don't have the time to discuss this, but I would love to continue to have the conversation with you as well. The other question that I had was, and if you had seen this document was given to us by a previous speaker. You had spoken about accountability.
Yes.
Line item by line item, every dollar that has been spent and where it has been spent and the amount that has been spent for EFAs.
First, from the Children's Scholarship Fund?
Yes, she's shaking her head, yes.
Yeah.
So you can look here for computer hardware and you can see all the companies the money went to and the amount. In fact, the previous speaker spoke about Pikes Peak, I think
Pat's Peak. Yeah.
How much money was spent at Pat's Peak. So I think the information is there, the transparency is there. So anybody who wants to look it up can look it up and find it.
Well, then.
Ma'am, sorry, I would argue that this is a better document than what you usually get at your school deliberative sessions, where you have to dig through page after page after page of.
Mr. Chair, this is getting argumentative.
I'm not, Senator, sorry, I'm not being argumentative. I'm just asking what really is a simple question.
Thank you very much for the
Dr. Leggett,
question.
you can certainly respond, Dr. Leggett.
Thank you for your question. The Children's Scholarship Fund has refused a full audit. They have refused, under the Right to Know Act, to do a full audit. So what you're looking at there must be piecemeal, because that has been a problem with the Children's Scholarship Fund the entire time. And that is part of the lack of accountability. So the other thing is that anybody who wants any information from any school district can process a right to know request and they can get whatever they want. If you're, and I'm happy to do that. I actually just received one today. But, and every superintendent that I know would do the same. We're actually required to. So I do think that it's a problem that, one, that we have been denied a full audit of the Children's Scholarship Fund. Two, the handful of things that were pulled from it, there was found to be fraud. Actual people who weren't New Hampshire residents or people who didn't have their income, eligibility verified through the organization. And that New Hampshire taxpayers really deserve that level of accountability, which is what they get through their public school districts.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dr. Leggett.
Thank you very
Chair
much for your time.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Brian Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Brian Hawkins, representing NEA New Hampshire. I'll summarize just a few points, try not to repeat what's already been raised. And mainly I want to stick to since this is the Senate Education Finance Committee, some of the finances. One of the benefits that New Hampshire has in looking at the other states that have either greatly expanded their voucher programs or gone to a universal program is their experience. And what we've seen is the states that have greatly expanded these programs, that is at the cost of funding for public schools. Arizona was mentioned. I'd like to just add to that, the Arizona program is now costing $1 billion per year. And looking at our own program, which is currently at the updated numbers from the department being $30 million a year with the fall enrollment. Those numbers, when the House Education Finance Committee had their orientation, they were given a document from the department that said that under current law, that budget was going to grow by FY26 to over $38 million a year with no changes. So that budget is growing. And so some of the numbers I heard before about the program only costing another $15 or $17 million it just seems unrealistic. The other thing that I would say with the experience from other states is the higher income you go, the greater the uptake you're going to have in participation. And that has been true in all the states that have gone to these large expansions. And the biggest problem for New Hampshire with that is that consistent with our state's experience and those states, over 80% of the families who participate in that were not in a public school. And so these are all new dollars that the state is committing to. We're committing to a second education system when we haven't even really figured out how to adequately fund the first one. And so I think it comes down to a question of priorities. We have here in New Hampshire, we have an education system where we are struggling to hire and retain educators. And so instead of investing more dollars into this program, I would just respectfully ask that you consider investing in schools so that they can hire, retain, recruit qualified educators for, as was said earlier, the nearly 90% of students who those schools serve. The last thing I'll just add is in the House hearing on the universal plan, they received a letter from Representative Neil Kirk representing the Granite State taxpayers. At least it was on letterhead, and he was opposed to that bill. And he was opposed to it because of what I mentioned earlier, which was most of the students in the program were never were not in a public school. And so again, at a time when we have very tight budgets, we would suggest that you send this bill to be inexpedient to legislate, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Any questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Brian. Good to see you.
You too.
Can you give us a figure on how much the state of New Hampshire spends on public education every year? What the last number was, if you kind of have an idea?
I don't have the figure off the top of my head. I think it is, I'd want to get that back to you. I know it's changed, so I don't want to give you a wrong number. And there's no question that to fund public education, it's a major investment. But I think, as was said earlier, if we're going to, particularly for those communities that struggle to raise the dollars at the local level because of property taxes, we know that so closely results are tied to the amount of investment in whether you're talking community to community or state to state. And I think we see that in our own state as we do in states across the country. So I think it's an important investment, and I hope the legislature will continue to make investments, especially for those districts who struggle to raise the dollars to fund a public school.
Would you be able to get us that number?
Certainly, I think that the department has a number of spreadsheets they've been doing for the House just today, and so I think that would be available easily. So I'm happy to get that for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Hawkins? Seeing none, thank you. Chair recognizes Mary Grassett.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say real quick before I started that public education has kind of been bashed in New Hampshire this afternoon by some people. And I have two kids who went to public schools. One graduated from Georgetown Law and is now a lawyer with a very prominent firm in New York City. And my son is an entrepreneur with his third year of owning his own business at 27 years old. And they both went to public school. So I think that while public schools need some work, they are certainly produce very successful students as well. My name is Mary Grassett, and I've been teaching at Mountain View Middle School in Goffstown for the past 26 years. That's actually since the last century. So, additionally, I've had the honor of serving as the president of the Goffstown Teachers Association for the past 10 years. I'm here today to express my strong opposition to SB 295, a bill that threatens the financial stability and future of our public education system. As someone who has taught social studies, specifically U.S. history, for the past 26 years, I can tell you that the history of education in this country is one of public education. In 1642, the Puritans passed the Massachusetts School Law of 1642, requiring all children to learn to read and write. They also required that once a community had 50 or more households, it was to appoint a teacher and that the parents in that community pay for public education. They did not say only students who went to private schools or children whose parents could afford to pay for it. Puritans believed education was a moral obligation, thus laying the foundation to ensure public education was there for all. Every day, teachers and students in our public schools today face the challenge of inadequate resources. We're often short basic necessities like pencils, erasers, paper, due to budget cuts. It's like trying to bake a cake without any flour. It's very frustrating. Expanding programs like those proposed by SB 295 will only make this worse by diverting funds away from where they're desperately needed. In this digital age, it's imperative that we equip our students with the tools they need to succeed. Instead of channeling resources into programs that support multiple school systems, why don't we invest in technology for our public schools? States like Maine and Ohio have set a precedent by providing laptops for all students, ensuring that every child, regardless of their household's financial situation, have access to the digital world. In my district, there's a stark disparity in technical proficiency among students because not all families can afford computers or laptops. SB 295, along with similar bills, would lead to a dual system, forcing Granite Staters to fund both private and public schools. This not only threatens public school funding, but also places an additional financial burden on local property taxpayers, potentially leading to future tax hikes. By removing the income tax, this bill will allow people who don't economically need a voucher a credit to be used towards funding the private education of their children, as opposed to supporting the children whose parents can't afford to send their children to private schools, even with a voucher program. I could get into the pieces about scrutiny on the New Hampshire Department of Education, but that's been brought up. Instead of siphoning funds away from the public schools, I urge the legislature to focus on supporting our community education by funding special education costs, increasing state aid to local schools, and funding school building aid. In Goffstown, we have a school that's over 100 years old, and while we celebrate the fact that the building is over 100 years old, it looks like it's over 100 years old. It would be great for them to have a new school. I respectfully ask you to find SB 295 inexpedient to legislate. Let's prioritize the needs of our public schools. support our educators, and ensure that every student in New Hampshire has the opportunity to thrive. After all, a well-funded school is like a well-oiled machine. It runs smoothly and gets the job done. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Grassett. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, ma'am. Chair recognizes Mr. Adam Haverstock. Please just confirm, sir, that I said your name correctly.
Yes, Adam Haverstock.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about universal education freedom accounts, of which I'm in support. My name is Adam Haverstock. I'm a resident of Hudson. I'm a constituent of Senator Carson. My wife and I have 2 young children. My daughter is almost 5 years old. She starts kindergarten this fall. My 3-year-old son will start in the fall of 2027 in 2 years. We would like to send our children to a local private school in Hudson, but unfortunately we do not qualify for an EFA. This is because our income, while modest, is slightly above the current eligibility requirements for EFAs. As we consider the future of education in our state, I urge you to support Universal Education Freedom Accounts, a program that empowers parents to make the best educational choices for their children. By providing a flexible education funding system, EFAs give parents the freedom to choose the best education for their child, whether that's traditional public school, private school, or homeschooling. This approach will improve academic outcomes, increase efficiency, and promote accountability in the education system. But most importantly, it will offer parents a choice in how their children are educated instead of a one-size-fits-all public education system. EFAs promote efficiency by allowing parents to direct education funding to the schools and programs that best meet their child's needs. By giving parents more control over education funding, EFAs increase accountability and transparency in the education system. Education choices shouldn't be dependent on your zip code or your income. It should be based upon what parents believe is in the best interests of their children. I believe that universal education freedom accounts are a critical step towards creating a more equitable and effective education system in New Hampshire. I urge you to support this legislation and to give all parents the freedom to choose the best education for their children. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Amanda Whedon.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Whedon, and I am a resident of Rochester. I am a home education advocate in the state, and I work to lead the largest home education support group in New Hampshire. But I'm here actually representing myself as a taxpayer. I have 4 children, and they have always been home educated. And again, we understand that there are 4 pathways in New Hampshire. There's the 3rd pathway, which is home education, which is unfunded. There's no government taxpayer money awarded to the children. It has nothing to do with taxpayer funding. And then there's the EFA, which is a separate 4th educational pathway, right? And so some families, good parents, wonderful children, decide to move from the 3rd pathway to this government taxpayer-funded program into the 4th pathway. This program, and again, I'm on the front lines of this, has devastated the home education community. I would be happy to speak at any point with any legislator to talk about the multiple reasons, real-life examples of how this enormous sum of money that is being infused into our community has devastated us. So, as a taxpayer and as a person with a degree in business, this is a fiscally irresponsible bill. There is no way to pay for universal school choice without depleting the Education Trust Fund. Now, I want to be clear because I'm an anomaly. I'm a very conservative Republican voter, and I agree with Republicans a good 95% of the time. Okay? As a taxpayer who has made the choice to remove my children
from government-funded educational options. I made that choice. Why am I now responsible for paying for other people's educational choices? This does not make sense to me. Earlier, Senator Carson, you held up the very small audit that was released from the Children's Scholarship Fund. And I want to turn our attention back to that because, again, I'm on the front lines of this. On that list that is supposedly accountable and transparent, you can look down and see Amazon as a vendor. I want to understand how I am responsible as a taxpayer to pay for other people's purchases on Amazon. That is not transparent. It does not tell us line by line what those fees, who's paying. It does not specify. And this is important because if this were to be put up for a vote in front of taxpayers, this absolutely would be unacceptable. Okay, this is a funding issue. And the real question is not, the motives or intentions of these parents, because parents want the best for their kids. That's not in question. But the question here today is, should we be responsible for paying for optional additional items like equestrian boots, pottery wheels, gymnastics classes? Because let me tell you something, I pay for those things by myself. I use my budget, my home budget, to pay for those things because I make those choices. Taxpayers should not be responsible for paying for these things, and taxpayer-funded EFAs cost money. I believe in a low-income program to help families who can't afford educational options. I agree with that, okay? It needs to be meticulously guarded. It needs to be well-written and administrated well. The current program is none of those things. It's not. So when we're talking about bringing this to everyone, when the current program has issues that no one seems to be willing to address, I have serious problem with that as a taxpayer. So depleting the Educational Trust Fund with universal school choice is fiscally irresponsible. There is no way to pay for this. I don't like taxes. I'm a property owner. And there are people now in New Hampshire who are struggling with the increase in property taxes. And as we all know, the majority of this trust fund in public school is funded by mostly property taxes. Let's look at the long term and try to figure out options that do not increase taxes or force me as a person who has opted out of that government-funded education, opted out, and I do not want to be forced to pay for other people's options.
That concludes your testimony, ma'am. Any questions? No? Thank you, Ms. Whedon. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Michelle Rohrbacher. Is there Michelle Rohrbacher? Oh, here you are. Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee. I am here today to urge my strong opposition to this bill. My family falls within the original criteria that the EFA was set up to capture, the 300% of the federal poverty level. As such, my family also qualifies for the program that we do participate in, which is the Education Tax Credit Scholarship. In participating in the tax credit scholarship, we stay as 193A home educating family. We are not entered into the fourth pathway as Mrs. Whedon was clear on. The original intent of the EFA was to help low-income families to escape failing schools because they couldn't afford to get out of them. The current participation of the EFA has been over 70% non-switchers. The current EFA program has families that have been denied because their income exceeded the maximum. There's no fiscal note attached to this. It is not impossible to extrapolate the data that at least as much as it has cost yet, and as much as those families that were denied, would be the minimum expense expected on this bill. Families that need educational choices have them. Educational choice is available in New Hampshire. The choice to make others pay for it is not. When a family chooses to exit the public school, they have options for scholarships, other avenues within their personal circles to obtain funding. Those families that are truly in need exercise those options every day. And those families that are truly in need aren't participating in the EFA as it is. With the income at 350%, they are not participating. Removing the income restriction will not get them to participate either. They're choosing to not enter that fourth pathway. This is going to get out of control. It's not going to be everybody takes it, but it's going to be people that don't need it take it. You heard someone say that his family of 4 makes a little bit too much to receive the EFA under the current standards. In the homeschooling community, we have seen people talking against being left out, that they've been left out of the EFA because they make too much money. And when you look at the data, these people make 750% of the federal poverty limit. You cannot tell me that those families aren't exercising different choices than families that are at 300% of the federal poverty limit. Those families have options, and they are not families that need support from state funds. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions of this witness? You.
I missed your name.
Michelle Rohrbacher.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, Michelle.
Michelle Rohrbacher.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else not signed up who wishes to speak on Senate Bill 295? Seeing none, we had 9 people sign in but did not wish to speak, 5 in opposition, 4 in support. There were 2,867 people who signed in opposition online, 217 in support. I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 295.